Different classification. All right, so now we're gonna take a little break. All right, we just looked at state morphology for what it is, the actual shapes of states, but there are other elements to state morphology or to understanding state relationships, such as the boundaries, that, the areas on the outside of those states. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna classify boundaries together real quick, and different classifications of boundaries which go hand in hand with state morphology. Water, mountains, and deserts are gonna be. Let me get this out of the way. Water, mountains, and deserts are going to be your major physical features that serve as boundaries, or historically have really served as boundaries between lands. Okay? And it's really important to understand this. If you're looking at ancient civilizations, for example, like Sumer in the Indus Valley in Egypt, for Sumer, you've got, not a whole lot of natural barriers. They're kind of out in the open, but you might have some deserts that might serve as natural barriers. A lot of people in Sumerian cities would have built walls because they lacked protection. But if you look at a place like the Indus Valley, they have the mountains to the north. They were completely isolated from people on the Huanghe River Valley, the Yellow River Valley in China, because of the mountains. They also were isolated from other groups because of their geography as well. And Egypt, the only way you could get in there is from the north because of the fact that they had miles and miles and miles of desert on either the east or the west of that ancient civilization. So the entire civilization of Egypt was along the Nile River. So these are how some of the, natural boundaries listed here would have served, to protect these ancient civilizations. Today, water is still a boundary, right? I mean, you still have, if you look at immigration into Europe, the Mediterranean is a major, that's the word I'm looking for. And when you say migration, it's going to be a intervening obstacle, right? It's going to be something that gets in the way of people traveling from one place to another because it's water. It's hard to get across. You can't just swim over an ocean. I don't care what year it is. Yeah, I mean, sea travel and air travel is cheaper and more accessible to everyone than ever before. But if you're an immigrant and you're poor and you're trying to, particularly a refugee trying to get to a country to seek refuge, then water is going to be a major issue for you. Mountains are a major issue, and deserts. See, all these things are still issues today. Here's the example of where the Harappan river valley would have been. The Indus River Valley would have been right here, and you can see that the elevation is intense all around, but especially the Himalayan mountain range. The largest mountain range on Earth. You've got the plateau of Tibet right here. Very, very high elevation. And then here's where the Yellow River Valley would have been with ancient China. So there's not going to be a whole lot of interaction between those groups due to the natural boundaries. But that's not the only way that we characterize and classify boundaries in human geography. All right. There are actual classifications, and sometimes these might look different depending on which book you're reading, and so there might be a few things in your textbook that don't show up here in my PowerPoint, but for the most part, this right here is going to cover your boundaries that you need to know about for the test. And it looks like this. You've got antecedent boundaries, subsequent boundaries, relic, and superimposed. And then there might be other classifications of those, but these are here are really important. And when you look at antecedent boundaries, they are simply boundaries that the lines between the two countries were drawn prior to the population of those countries. All right. So if you look at the history of Canada, the United States, the boundary there on the north of the U.S. was set well before people started to develop those, frontier lands further to the west along that boundary. And Canada's population is freakishly small compared to the United States. But still, the border was already known. This is the textbook example. It's probably the best example of an antecedent boundary. Another historic example, perhaps the Treaty of Tordesillas. Anybody know what that is? The Treaty of Tordesillas? Not sure if you guys have had world history not yet. But during the age of exploration, the Treaty of Tordesillas was actually made between Spain and Portugal over who would get what portion of the New World, or really of the world in general. Okay, so Spain got everything to the west of the treaty line, which went kind of right through Brazil, and Portugal got everything kind of to the east, including the areas along the African coast, which was kind of their big route to the Spice Islands that saved them so much money, or I guess made them so much money off of the other Europeans who wanted access to the spice trade. Subsequent boundaries are kind of the opposite of an antecedent boundary. The boundaries are going to be drawn after people arrive in those areas, and usually subsequent boundaries are created in order to divide people by ethnic, religious, or linguistic characteristics. All right, so there's a reason for that line. It exists in order to keep people apart from other people, or maybe even be a border between different nationalities. All right, so a good example of that, perhaps the European countries. I would say that those people, nationally speaking, are centered on different characteristics like language and culture and religion. Sorry about my kids, y'all. Relic boundary is going to be an area that's no longer a border at all. The Great Wall of China, for example, that used to try to keep the barbarians out of the north. There was never a time that worked for them, but it was still a border that represented where the Chinese people were and where the barbarians were. And I don't know if you guys ever noticed this, but the Great Wall of China is not along the modern day northern border of China. It's actually quite further to the south, because really that's what the Chinese Empire was back in the day. Another example would be Hadrian's Wall. I wish I would have put a picture of the Roman Empire on here. I meant to do that. I did a few weeks ago. But if you look at the island of Great Britain and the extent of the Roman Empire, you can see a line that separates what the Romans were able to control versus what they couldn't. They couldn't take from the Germanic people in the north. And so that would be an example of a relic boundary. That's Hadrian's Wall, named after the emperor that had it built. And then finally, superimposed boundaries are going to be boundaries that are placed on a group of people by a group outside. All right, so the perfect example of this is the entire continent of Africa. I've got a map. Finally, actually remember to put one in. I've got a map that shows the ethnic boundaries of Africa. I don't have a map that shows the political boundaries of Africa, I don't think. Nope. But these lines that divide the thousands of ethnic groups, or I guess probably close to, and by some counts, over 1,000 ethnic groups that live in Africa, the political lines don't care about these ethnic groups. The political lines were created by imperial countries, the countries that dominated these areas during the age of imperialism. They're the ones that drew the lines that exist today for these countries. You wonder why Africa is always such a hot mess, and why places like Sudan is fighting a civil war. This here is roughly where Sudan is. And northern Sudan is roughly going to be in this area here. I'm just kind of ballparking it. And then southern Sudan is going to be here. Well, look at all the ethnic diversity that exists there. They're not going to get along. So they're going to fight civil wars for decades and decades and decades and never stop. It's because every group wants a chance to rule or to govern the affairs of everyone else. And that's what you get whenever you impose one government over thousands, or I guess hundreds, of different ethnic groups. So that's the example of a superimposed boundary. To review, superimposed boundaries are going to be boundaries that were placed on a group by an outside force, like in this case, Europe during the Berlin Conference. All right. So I also want to talk a little bit about the characteristics of boundaries. Not all boundaries are friendly, right? I mean, obviously, right now, the big thing in the news in the U.S. is the southern border. Okay, building a wall, right? Government shutdown, all that stuff is in our news right now in relation to border issues. And so you've got all kinds of border issues that could creep up. In the case of North and South Korea, it's definitely one that you guys have probably already discussed in class, but it's one that's worth knowing a little bit more about. Because of the historic implications. And that is, at the 38th parallel along the island, I guess along the peninsula of Korea, is the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone. Now, and by that, I mean, it's the most militarized zone on Earth. Okay, try to make a meme. There's more, it's a hotter border than any other border on the face of the planet. Okay, there's never going to be two places there, I guess, more at arms with each other than that place right there. It's heavily guarded on both sides. People have to be a certain height in order to be on at either end, so you get their tallest, most intimidating looking troops. there's there's electric fences, there's landmines, there's all kinds of shrapnel and things like that within the DMZ area, maybe roughly a mile between the two sides. I know that the North Koreans will build elaborate cities on their end of the DMZ that make the South look like, hey, let's go over there because it's so awesome. They have all sorts of different political disputes that it really is kind of the a very tense area to be from what I've gathered. There is a room within this little area between the DMZ where each side has access, but they hardly ever will go and meet. I think recently, actually, they have probably met there a few times more. In fact, honestly, in the last year, 2018 was kind of a big year for the relationship between North and South. I want to say it was when was it that? Yeah, that was wasn't it the Winter Olympics was a year ago, right? If I remember right, and then the North and South actually competed together on an Olympic team. That's a big deal. The issues with Trump having meetings with Kim Jong-un is a big deal that hasn't happened before. And so whereas things with North Korea got a little bit crazy there for a little while, like really crazy, things have weirdly kind of been pretty calm between the two relative to how it has been for years. Not that they don't still do crazy things and that there's still a lot of tension, but it has gotten better. Here is a video on my YouTube channel where I talk about boundaries in a little bit greater detail. If you want more on this, I'm going to move on because I'm already 35 minutes in. I want to make sure I finish up in 45 to 50 minutes. But feel free to go and look at this. If you type in boundaries, Professor Dustin, you'll be able to see it. And I cover all of those different types of boundaries.